So yeah, that's
So
the
the
end of my
next
topic.
story, the next story I got here, I believe it was about a week ago now. The United Kingdom had a referendum vote, and they voted to leave the European Union. The movement was called Brexit,
Mm-hmm.
Britain exit. Little play on words there. And Downey, you know I'm into politics. I'm not going to get into the
Mm-hmm.
political side of this right now. I'm just going to get into the video game side of this right now because there is a lot to talk about on the political side, but there's also something to talk
Right.
about on the video game side, which of course isn't necessarily something you go into the voting booth and you say, "Well, how's this going to affect my video
Yeah.
games?" But it's still something to consider because this is really just about business in general.
Mm-hmm.
So if I understand the European Union correctly, the freedom of movement and freedom of work aspect of it is you can be a citizen of Britain, you can
Migrate.
without any
Yeah.
problems, you can live in Germany,
Without a
you
visa,
can
without
you
any
can
real
work in
paperwork.
Germany,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely no problem. You don't need any extra paperwork. I mean, if I remember correctly, like even if like my high school teacher, she technically lives in South Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
and now she works in North Carolina. So there's like she has to pay double tax almost. So there's like extra stuff that goes into it, and it's just like a 10-mile difference. But when it comes to video games, Game Informer has a good article, and it's a update on an article they previously posted.
Mm-hmm.
It's just talking with European developers, specifically developers in the UK. And to summarize it real briefly, they get tax breaks and tax credit for making video games because it's an entertainment, it's a media. So same with like how movies get tax breaks,
Right.
video games get the same thing too. So these developers are kind of now worried about financing these games and how they're gonna pay their employees and pay for everything else that goes into these games. And then also when it comes to the freedom of work, when they have their artists that live in France, how easy is it gonna be for them to communicate and work with them
With
without
like their
having to do
London,
any
like
extra
like thinking of like
tax?
Ubisoft and how they have divisions all across Europe, and how
Right.
that's going to affect them, and they have the
So
London-based team.
are they gonna now have to do extra tax work? Are they gonna have to fill out extra paperwork to enter UK to go to a team meeting or something like that?
Right.
So again, this isn't something that you necessarily decide your vote on.
Mm-hmm.
Although thinking about the business, because business does form your economy, that is something to consider if you
Right.
were in the UK voting on this. But for people, just you and me in America who just play these games and don't even necessarily even hear about the developer over in Europe, we just play the game that they make. It is something that we'll have to just see how it plays out. Hopefully, some of these smaller developers, they don't have to let go of people or anything, and they can do whatever games they have set forth to do.
Right.
So I mean, yeah, that's really all I had to say about it. Again, it's not anything too surprising. It's not anything like, well, if they had known this before the vote, it would have changed everything. But it is just something about
This is all
general
to take
business
into
that would be
consideration.
affected with the leave from the EU.
It's really
So-
interesting because the worst part that I feel developers get when it comes to making a video game is that people don't know what they're going through.
Right.
It's that the publishers are just like, hey, we're going to release a statement saying you're this far along, you're trying to hit this release date. They don't need to hear, well, Tim's really been struggling in the office to help get the transportation to get over here, so it's been a little hard in the editing department.
Right.
Like, no one's ever talking about that. And I think
Yeah.
the only time we're hearing about developers now is either when they're announcing a game or when they're closing down shop or when they're like Sega and they're falling downhill at a
Right.
rapid pace, even though Sega's been falling downhill for decades now. But
Yeah.
I think... But I honestly think that it's concerning to me, and I think we need more things like dev diaries, and we need more things to know what's going on with developers. So if there are people who are like Patreons or Kickstarters or whatever, or people who are just like, yeah, I really want to help fund this game, or I want to be aware of what's going on with our developers, that we can keep up with it. Because, I mean, it's already hard enough to make a game, let alone if you're doing it, especially in Europe, and you have assets all over. So yeah,
Right.
I think it definitely is really interesting.
And we'll this is a really good article. We'll definitely put this into the about section of this video. But Game Informer, they really do break it down, like just numerical reasons of or impacts that the UK will have because of this.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them, the favorable tax environment I was talking about, it's called the Video Games Tax Relief and R&D Tax Relief.
Mm-hmm.
That's what gives them the tax incentive to make their games and the tax breaks to help finance it. And then also something that, I mean, this is just a whole can of worms right here, but intellectual property. When you're in the European Union, so all copyright laws are the same and everything's under the same umbrella. Now you're the United Kingdom. You're not the European Union. Are your intellectual properties gonna be subject to change? Do you even have control of the same IPs?
Right.
If half of the owners are in the EU and half of them aren't. So I mean, copyright and intellectual property, that has always been very, very tricky, and it's something that, I mean, American government, the European government, they really do need to sit down and figure it out. Granted, it's not like, do we need to go to war and how do we give people food, but it's something that really does affect business.
And
as a
Brexit,
whole.
that's not immediately taking effect. It's still going to
Brexit,
take
that will
time.
The lawyers of the EU and the leaders of the other EU nations have said this needs to be done as quickly as possible. But no, it's not going to be tomorrow they're out. I mean, it may be a year or two, honestly, before they're out of the EU, because that's a big, big decision to leave the European Union.
That just sounds stressful. I don't want to be in that room.
Yeah. But I mean, definitely with just copyright, I mean, I think in the 70s, the FCC made like a copyright act with all these new legislations. But that was in the 70s, and it's not the 70s, and technology has changed entirely.
Right.
So there really does need to be an overhaul of just reviewing the laws and figuring out what stays and what goes.
Yeah. Just to focus on just, keeping up with things and making sure.
Well, you need to make sure that you're not only giving people, I mean, like Activision, giving them the power to take care of their assets, but also encourage people to attempt to make their own without worrying if theirs legitimately slightly resembles another IP, then they get a lawsuit, right? So if like the Orion project, if they had legitimately, like, just their guns were only somewhat similar and not copies, and Activision took them down, yeah, that's wrong, and unfortunately Activision probably would have won in that case because they are so powerful. So that would have been a situation of the big guy taking advantage of their power. But again, in that situation, it really was copyright infringement. But if it wasn't copyright infringement and it just looked similar, that guy's screwed. Then Trek Industries is screwed. So that's where copyright really does need to be looked over and reviewed entirely. So we'll definitely put this link in the description because I think it's worth a read. It breaks it down, and it has quotes from developers directly. So yeah, that's just how Brexit is going to affect video games, at least that we can see. There could be future consequences or benefits that we don't know about yet, but for now, this is what they're predicting will happen.
Okay. Thank you, Will. That sounds really stressful. But